I wasn't doing anything
No
wrong.
seatbelt!
I wasn't speeding. I wasn't swerving. But the moment I saw the police lights behind me, my stomach dropped. It was a quiet evening. The kind of evening where nothing feels dangerous. The sun was low, almost gone. The sky had that soft orange and blue mix. I had just left the grocery store. 2 bags on the passenger seat. Milk, bread, chicken. Normal stuff. I remember thinking about dinner. I remember thinking about how tired I was. I remember thinking about how good it would feel to just get home. Then I saw the lights. Red and blue. Flashing. Bright. Too close. At first, I thought maybe the cop was going somewhere else. Maybe there was an emergency. I slowed down anyway, just in case. But the lights stayed on me. I checked my mirrors. No cars between us. No one else around. My heart started beating faster. I pulled over to the side of the road. Slowly. Carefully. I turned off the engine. I put my hands on the steering wheel, just like my father taught me years ago. That lesson never leaves you, especially when you're black. I took a deep breath. I told myself to stay calm. I told myself, you didn't do anything wrong. The officer took his time getting out of the car. I watched him in the side mirror. White male. Mid-40s, maybe. Tall. Broad shoulders. His walk was slow. Confident. Almost relaxed. That scared me more than if he had rushed. He stopped near my window, but didn't say anything at first. Just looked inside the car. Looked at me. Looked past me. His eyes paused for a second longer than normal. License and registration, he said. No greeting. No explanation. Just command. Yes, sir, I said. My voice sounded calm, but my hand were not. I moved slowly. I made sure he could see everything I was doing. I handed him my documents. He didn't take them right away. Instead, he leaned down slightly and looked at my chest. Then my waist. Then the seat. You know why I stopped you, he asked. I shook my head. No, sir. He smirked. Not a friendly smile. Not even neutral. You're not wearing a seatbelt. I froze for a second. I was wearing a seatbelt. I looked down. The belt was right there. Across my chest. Clicked in. I am wearing it, I said gently. That's when his face changed. The smirk disappeared. His jaw tightened. Don't argue with me, he said. I swallowed. I'm not arguing, sir. I just step out of the vehicle. Those words hit hard. Because once you step out, things can go anywhere. I glanced forward for just a second. Then I spoke. Is there a reason you need me to step out? He straightened up. Because I said so. His hand moved slightly. Not to his gun, but close enough. I opened the door and stepped out. The air felt colder, even though it wasn't. I stood where he told me to stand. Hands visible. Back straight. Cars passed by slowly. Some drivers stared. Some didn't want to look at all. He walked around me. Slowly. Like he was inspecting something. You got any weapons on you? He asked. No, sir. Any drugs? No, sir. He paused. You sure? Yes, sir. He looked back inside my car. That's when his eyes narrowed. He stared at the passenger seat, at the back seat, at the shape under the jacket. Something shifted in his expression. Not fear. Not respect. Suspicion. Who else is in the car? He asked. I hesitated. Someone's resting, I said. That's not an answer, he snapped. I took another breath. My family member. He stepped closer. Turn around. I did. He patted me down. Rougher than necessary. Longer than necessary. I kept my mouth shut. When he was done, he walked back toward his car with my license. Didn't say another word. I stood there. On the side of the road. Alone. Waiting. Minutes passed. Each minute felt heavier. I could feel eyes on me from passing cars. I could feel judgment. Assumptions. What did he do? Why is he stopped? That's the part people don't talk about. You feel guilty even when you've done nothing wrong. The officer came back. He held a small notepad. I'm issuing you a citation, he said, for failure to wear a seatbelt. I stared at him. But I was wearing it, I said quietly. He leaned closer. Take it to court if you don't like it. Then he added something under his breath. Something I had heard before in my life. Always the same excuses. That's when I knew. This wasn't about a seatbelt. It never was. I looked past him for a second. Toward my car. Toward the person still sitting inside. The officer followed my eyes. He turned his head, slightly. Squinted. "Who did you say was in the car again?" he asked. I didn't answer right away. Because I knew something he didn't. And, in just a little while, he was going to find out. The officer told me to stay where I was and walked back to his patrol car again. I stood on the shoulder of the road, hands resting at my sides, trying not to move too much. The ground felt uneven under my shoes. Small rocks pressed into the soles, but I didn't shift my weight because I didn't want to give him any reason to say I was being uncooperative. Cars passed by, one after another, some slow, some fast. A few drivers stared. Most didn't. That feeling hit me again, the one I felt my whole life. Being watched. Being judged. Being assumed guilty before anyone knows your name. I kept my eyes forward, but my thoughts were loud. I replayed the moment he said no seatbelt again and again. I knew I had it on. I always wear it. It's automatic for me. The click. The pull across my chest. I remembered doing it before I even left the parking lot. This wasn't a mistake. It wasn't confusion. It was a choice he made the second he saw me behind the wheel. From where I stood, I could see him in his car through the windshield. He was typing something into the computer. Stopping. Looking up at me. Then typing again. Each pause made my chest tighter. I wondered what he was writing. I wondered what words he was choosing. I wondered how much power those words would have later. A few lines typed by a stranger can follow you for years. That thought scared me more than the ticket. I glanced toward my car again, careful not to turn my head too fast. The windows were slightly tinted, but I knew exactly what he had seen earlier. The shape, the stillness, the presence. Whoever was inside hadn't moved much since we were pulled over. That was intentional. We both knew it was better that way. Stillness keeps things calm. Stillness keeps things from escalating. The officer stepped out of his car again, holding the citation pad and my license. He walked slower this time. His shoulders were squared. His face looked harder now. Like he had already decided how this interaction was going to end. He stopped a few feet in front of me and looked me up and down, not quickly, but slowly, like he was taking inventory. "You got a problem with the ticket?" he asked. I chose my words carefully. "I don't agree with it, sir." He let out a short laugh. Not amused. Not friendly. Just dismissive. Funny how that always works. I didn't respond. I had learned a long time ago that silence is sometimes safer than truth. He pointed toward my car with his pen. "You said someone else was in there." "Yes, sir." "Why didn't they speak up?" "They're resting." He stared at me for a moment, like he was deciding whether to push further. I could see it in his eyes. He wanted to. He wanted control. He wanted reaction. "You nervous about something?" he asked. "No, sir." "You sure?" he said, leaning slightly closer. "Yes, sir." Another pause. Longer this time. Then he stepped back and started writing on the ticket. The sound of the pen scraping against paper felt loud in the quiet evening. Each stroke felt final. As he wrote, he talked. Not to me, exactly. More like at me. "You people always think rules don't apply to you. Always got an excuse. Always someone else's fault." I felt my jaw tighten. I kept my face neutral. I stared straight ahead. He tore the ticket from the pad and held it out. I took it slowly, making sure our hands didn't touch. "Court date's on there," he said. "Don't ignore it." "I won't," I replied. He didn't give my license back right away. Instead, he looked past me again, toward the car, toward the passenger side. "Tell your friend to keep their hands where I can see them," he said. "They're not my friend," I said calmly. "They're family." That made him pause. "Family," he repeated. "What kind?" I looked at him. Really looked at him this time. I saw confidence. I saw bias. I saw a man who believed this stop was his moment of authority. "Immediate," I said. Something changed in his expression. Just slightly. Not fear. But curiosity. The kind that makes people ask one question too many. He finally handed me my license. "Get back in your car," he said. "But don't leave yet." I nodded and walked back slowly. I opened the driver's door and sat down. My hands were shaking now, but I kept them low, out of sight. I closed the door, gently. Through the windshield, I saw him standing there, arms crossed, watching. Then he walked toward the passenger side. The officer didn't rush toward the passenger side. He didn't place his hand on his radio or call for backup. He walked like this was still his scene, his stop, his control. Each step felt heavy to me, even though I was sitting down now. From the driver's seat, I watched him move in front of the car, his shadow stretching across the hood. The sun was almost gone, and the light was low enough to make everything feel uncertain. That kind of light changes how people act. It makes small situations feel bigger. I kept both hands on the steering wheel, exactly where he could see them. I didn't turn my head. I didn't want to look like I was watching him too closely. Inside, my heart was pounding. Not because I was afraid of what was in the car, but because I was afraid of how he would react once he realized his assumptions were wrong. He stopped at the passenger window and tapped the glass with 2 fingers. Slow, firm, not aggressive, but not polite either. I heard the faint sound through the closed windows. Inside, everything stayed still for a moment longer than usual. Then the window began to lower. The officer leaned in slightly. "Evening," he said, his voice different now. Lighter. Almost casual. "Mind telling me who you are?" The person in the passenger seat lifted their head and looked at him directly. Calm. Steady. No rush. No attitude. Just presence. Their posture alone changed the energy of the stop. It was subtle, but it was real. Some people carry themselves in a way that commands respect without asking for it. "I'm fine, officer," the person said. "Is there a problem?" The officer's eyes narrowed. He scanned their face, then their clothes. Nothing flashy. Nothing that screamed importance. Just neat. Clean. Intentional. He didn't see what he expected to see. That confused him. "This is a traffic stop," the officer said. "I need to know who's in the vehicle." The person nodded slightly. "You already spoke to the driver?" "Yes," the officer replied, his tone tightening again. "And now I'm speaking to you." There was a pause. The kind that makes people uncomfortable. The kind that exposes impatience. "My name isn't required unless I've done something wrong," the passenger said calmly. The officer straightened up. That calm didn't sit well with him. Calm can feel like defiance to someone who expects fear. "Step out of the vehicle," he said. I turned my head slightly without realizing it. The words hit harder this time. Not because I feared for myself, but because I knew what stepping out meant for the officer, not for us. The passenger didn't move right away. Instead, they reached slowly into their jacket pocket. I felt my breath catch, but their movements were controlled, visible. They pulled out a wallet and held it up. "I haven't done anything illegal," they said. "But I don't want this to go further than it needs to." The officer watched closely. Too closely. The wallet opened. A card was removed. Not waved. Not shoved forward. Just held at a comfortable distance. The officer leaned in to look. I saw it happen in real time. The change. The hesitation. The way his confidence slipped just a little. He didn't take the card immediately. "What's this?" he asked. "Identification," the passenger replied. The officer finally took it. His eyes dropped to the card. His posture shifted. His shoulders stiffened. He looked again. Then again. He cleared his throat. "Sir," he said, his voice suddenly more controlled, more careful. "Can you step out of the vehicle for a moment?" The passenger nodded and opened the door. They stepped out slowly, standing upright, meeting the officer's eyes without challenge. That's when I saw it clearly. The officer's hands weren't steady anymore. He adjusted his belt, shifted his stance, looked around briefly, like he was checking who might be watching. "You didn't mention this earlier," the officer said. "There was no reason to," the passenger replied. "What's your relationship to the driver?" the officer asked. "I'm his family," they said. "And I'm also someone who knows exactly how these stops are supposed to work." The officer swallowed. Traffic continued to move past us, but the world felt quieter, slower. like everything was waiting. The officer handed the card back. His tone had changed completely now. "Please wait here," he said. He walked away quickly, faster than before, back toward his patrol car. I stayed in my seat, watching it all through the windshield. For the first time since the lights came on, I wasn't afraid. The officer was. And whatever he had written in that ticket suddenly didn't feel so permanent anymore. The officer returned to his patrol car, holding the identification card in his hand like it weighed more than paper and plastic combined. He sat down slowly, but not calmly. His fingers tapped against the steering wheel, as if each tap measured something he couldn't put into words. I sat in my car, my hand still resting on the wheel, trying to appear relaxed, but my mind was racing. I knew he was processing more than just a simple traffic stop. He was grappling with assumptions he had made the second he saw me behind the wheel, and now those assumptions were crumbling in front of his eyes. The air between us felt thick, almost heavy, and the silence stretched in a way that made every small sound, the distant rumble of tires, the hum of streetlights, feel magnified. Inside the car, my passenger remained calm, upright, composed, showing nothing but patience. I glanced at them and felt a sense of relief, though my body remained tense. They didn't say a word, didn't need to. Their presence alone was a statement, one the officer seemed incapable of ignoring. I could see him through the windshield, leaning back in his seat, occasionally glancing toward us, as if seeking guidance from some invisible authority. Each glance seemed to remind him that he had stepped into a situation far beyond a typical stop. He had walked in expecting control, dominance, maybe even fear. But instead, he faced confidence, quiet and measured, and it unnerved him. Minutes passed slowly. I tried to focus on my breathing, keeping it shallow, steady, controlled. The world around me continued as normal. Cars moving, people driving by. But the small bubble around us felt like its own reality, suspended in tension. I remembered advice my father once gave me: stay calm. Don't give them a reason. Show them respect, but don't let them shake your core. I tried to hold on to that advice now, to anchor myself as I watched the officer scribble notes, glance back, and then scribble some more. Every so often, his eyes flicked toward my passenger, and I could see the calculation in them, the reckoning with the fact that appearances can be deceiving. Finally, the officer stepped out of the patrol car again. His movements were deliberate but hesitant, as if he was testing himself. He approached slowly, keeping a careful distance, his eyes constantly flicking from me to my passenger. He spoke in a lower tone this time, less forceful, more cautious. "I need to ask a few questions," he said. The words didn't feel like a command anymore. They felt like a negotiation, a cautious approach. My passenger nodded slightly, the kind of nod that suggested awareness without fear. It was deliberate, measured, powerful in its simplicity. I stayed quiet, letting them handle the conversation. The officer's first question was clipped. "Do you live nearby?" My passenger answered calmly, without hesitation. The answer was truthful, simple, yet it carried a weight in the delivery that only someone confident in their position could give. The officer's expression flickered, a small micro-expression of surprise, or maybe realization, that he hadn't encountered a situation like this before. His hands tightened around the ID card momentarily, then relaxed again. Each tiny movement felt charged with tension, like we were all aware of a fragile balance that could shift at any moment. The air felt colder now, though it wasn't. My body responded to the subtle changes. The way the officer's voice had become careful, the way his posture had shifted from authority to caution. It was a reminder that people react to presence and perception more than anything else. And my passenger's presence radiated quiet authority, the kind that doesn't need to shout, doesn't need to threaten. The officer was realizing slowly that his initial assumptions were wrong, that the dynamic had shifted entirely in ways he couldn't control. For a moment, the world seemed to slow down even further. The officer looked past us toward the street, as if hoping for backup or reinforcement that wouldn't come. I could almost hear his thoughts. How did this escalate so quickly? How did I get here? The ticket in his hand suddenly felt insignificant, a small piece of paper meant to represent power and control, now meaningless against the weight of what he was facing. He opened his mouth a few times, then closed it. He was searching for words, searching for authority, searching for a way to regain control that wasn't there. Finally, he took a step back and sighed. Not loudly, but audibly enough that I noticed. His shoulders slumped slightly, a subtle admission, whether conscious or not, that he had misjudged the situation. My passenger returned to a neutral, composed stance. Hands relaxed at their sides, eyes calm but alert. The silence between them was powerful, like a silent conversation in which dominance and respect were being negotiated without shouting, without threats. And in that silence, I felt an unusual mixture of fear and relief, knowing that the storm was not over, but the balance had shifted in our favor. The officer finally spoke again, voice quieter than before. "We'll sort this out later." He didn't say how. He didn't explain. But his tone carried a subtle acknowledgement that things had changed. The finality of the words hung in the air. He returned to his patrol car, leaving us in the quiet of the evening. And for the first time, I realized that the danger had not come from my passenger or me, but from the assumptions that had brought this officer to pull us over in the first place. Assumptions, bias, and unchecked authority. They were the real threats. And tonight, the calm confidence of someone who knows their worth had quietly dismantled it. We sat in silence for a few moments longer, the engine humming softly beneath us. I finally exhaled slowly, letting the tension drain from my shoulders. The road stretched ahead, still quiet, still ordinary. But nothing about this moment felt ordinary anymore. The stop was over, technically, but its impact lingered. And I knew that once we drove away, the story of this evening would stay with us, a reminder of what it means to face authority with calm, dignity, and an unshakable sense of presence. The patrol car sat quietly on the shoulder of the road, the officer inside staring at the dashboard lights as if they might offer him guidance. But nothing on the dashboard mattered anymore. He had made assumptions about me, assumptions about my passenger, assumptions about this situation. And now, slowly, one by one, they were crumbling. I watched him through the windshield, the small distance between us suddenly feeling enormous. I could see the subtle shifts in his posture, the tightening of his jaw, the way his fingers drummed against the steering wheel, the fleeting glance toward my passenger every few seconds. He had gone from authority to uncertainty, and it was visible in the smallest movements. Inside the car, my passenger remained still. Calm, controlled, eyes forward, hands resting lightly on their lap. Their presence wasn't loud or dramatic, but it carried weight, the kind that commands attention without a single word. I could feel it radiating, like a quiet power filling the space. The officer sensed it too. I could see the change in him, that flicker of hesitation that grows when someone realizes they miscalculated. He had expected compliance. He had expected fear. Instead, he had met dignity, composure, and a presence that made him pause. The subtle shift in energy was palpable, almost electric. Finally, he stepped out of the patrol car again. This time, there was no swagger, no deliberate authority in his movements. Each step was slower, measured, uncertain. He approached us, glancing first at me, then at my passenger. The earlier aggression had vanished. What remained was a careful, cautious officer trying to process the situation without letting it spiral further. The ticket in his hand felt like it had lost its power. He no longer held control. He was merely a man confronting his own misjudgments. "Sir," he said, addressing my passenger. His voice was quieter than before, measured. I didn't realize." He stopped himself mid-sentence. Words felt inadequate. He was searching, grasping for something to assert authority, but none existed. My passenger looked at him directly, unwavering, and waited. Not threatening, not intimidating. Simply present. Calm. Real. You're involved with law enforcement?" he finally asked. His tone was hesitant, uncertain. Not accusatory. Not commanding. Hesitant. As if he was stepping lightly into territory he had assumed was beneath him. I felt my chest tighten. Yes, this was the moment. The moment where all assumptions were confronted. The moment where bias met reality, and the imbalance of power began to correct itself silently. "No," my passenger replied simply. "But I'm someone who understands the law, sir. Very well. And I also know the consequences of misuse of authority." The words were quiet, but they struck hard. The officer flinched slightly, almost imperceptibly, a visible acknowledgement that this was not an ordinary stop. It wasn't just a seatbelt violation anymore. Not by a long shot. He looked at me now, the tension in his shoulders rising again. He glanced back toward the street, briefly, as if seeking backup. None was coming. He swallowed hard. His eyes flicked between me and my passenger again, and I realized he was trying to recalibrate, to find a way to assert dominance, but the usual methods no longer applied. Everything he had relied on, fear, bias, expectation, had evaporated. I need to verify your information," he said finally. Not a command, not a threat, just a statement. His tone was careful, measured, controlled. My passenger handed the ID card again, slowly, deliberately. The officer took it, fingers trembling slightly as he held it. He examined it again, and then he did something subtle but telling. He glanced at me, then back at my passenger, then back at the card. And for a moment, I saw him fully realize the weight of his misjudgment. The stop, the citation, the assumption, all meaningless compared to what he was facing now. He had misread everything. Every preconceived notion about who we were, about how we would react, about who had power in this encounter. Everything was wrong. The officer's face hardened slightly, but not with authority, with the smallest trace of embarrassment. The kind that creeps in when someone understands that they underestimated a situation, and they know it will be remembered. He exhaled slowly, almost imperceptibly, and handed the card back. "You may go," he said, his tone softer than anything he had used before. "Be careful." The words sounded almost hollow, like a formality rather than a warning. The weight of the situation had shifted entirely. As he returned to his patrol car, I felt a mixture of relief and lingering tension. The road stretched ahead, unchanged. The cars kept moving. Street lights flickered on. And yet, nothing felt ordinary anymore. The stop was over in a technical sense, but its impact would last. Not just for the officer, who now knew he had misjudged the situation, but for me and for my passenger. Moments like this leave a mark. They remind you of the fragility of assumptions, the danger of bias, and the power of presence and composure in the face of authority. We waited for a moment longer, the patrol car idling silently behind us. My passenger closed their eyes briefly, took a small breath, then turned to me. No words were needed. I understood. I had witnessed the quiet dismantling of someone else's assumptions, the subtle but complete shift in control, and the reminder that dignity and calm can speak louder than threats or bias ever could. Finally, I started the engine, ready to leave, carrying the weight of the encounter with me, knowing the story of this evening would never be forgotten. I drove slowly, keeping my eyes on the road, though my mind replayed every moment over and over. The red and blue lights were gone now, but the memory of them lingered, sharp and vivid. Every step, every glance, every word spoken, or left unspoken, played like a loop in my head. I could still feel the tension, that thick, suffocating weight of expectation and bias. But it was different now. He hadn't won. He hadn't intimidated us. And even though the citation was still in my hand, the real victory wasn't on paper. It was in how we had faced him. Calm, composed, present. And in doing so, we had revealed something he hadn't expected. The limits of assumptions, the fragility of unchecked authority, and the truth that dignity cannot be commanded. It must be met with respect. My passenger said nothing at first. They were quiet, focused on the passing streetlights and the familiar route home. But I could feel the steady energy they carried, the unspoken confidence that had shifted the entire encounter. I glanced at them briefly. Their eyes met mine. No words, just understanding. Relief mixed with pride, a quiet acknowledgement that we had both survived the tension together without compromising who we were. In that small glance, I realized that authority does not always equal power. And sometimes the simplest presence, The calm, measured strength of someone who knows their rights and their worth can speak louder than any badge. As we approached our neighborhood, the usual sounds, the hum of traffic, distant voices, the faint rustle of leaves, suddenly felt different. They felt lighter. The oppressive weight of fear and bias that had accompanied the officer's presence had finally lifted, replaced by a quiet, reflective clarity. I thought about the countless stories I had heard, the countless people who had faced stops like this and had not had the presence of mind or the quiet authority beside them to withstand it. I thought about how easily the law can be misused when assumptions are left unchecked. And I thought about how important it was to remain composed, to be aware, and to carry oneself with dignity, even in moments when the world seems to expect anything but. Parking the car in the driveway, I took a moment to sit there, engine off, breathing slowly. My passenger stepped out first, calm and unhurried, and I followed. We carried our groceries inside quietly, the mundane act feeling almost sacred after the tension we had just endured. The world inside our home felt safe, ordinary, but I knew that safety was fragile. I knew that it existed not because of the rules, not because of authority, but because we had met authority with awareness and composure. That subtle shift, the recognition that presence and dignity hold power, was something that stayed with me long after the encounter ended. Later that night, I sat down and reflected on everything that had happened. The citation still sat on the counter, a reminder of the stop, but it no longer felt threatening. The fear had transformed into understanding, a reminder that life, authority, and assumptions are rarely as simple as they seem. I thought about how many moments in life are shaped by perception, by the quick judgments people make based on appearance or circumstance. I thought about how easy it is to misread a situation, to act on bias rather than facts. And I realized that sometimes the quietest acts, the calm acknowledgement of one's own worth and the steady, composed presence beside you, can be the most powerful forms of resistance. That evening left me with a mix of emotions: relief, pride, a lingering tension that would fade slowly over time, and above all, clarity. I understood now more than ever that power is not always visible, and respect is not always earned through intimidation. Sometimes it is simply recognized when faced with truth. And as I placed the groceries in the fridge, preparing for dinner, I felt a sense of quiet justice, subtle but undeniable. The encounter had changed me, not in fear, not in anger, but in awareness. And that awareness, that quiet understanding, was a form of strength that no citation, no authority could take away. The next morning, I woke up with a heaviness that still lingered from the night before. The memory of the stop was fresh, the tension still wrapped around me like a thin layer I couldn't shake off immediately. I made coffee and sat by the window, watching the street wake up slowly. Birds chirped. A neighbor's dog barked. Ordinary sounds, ordinary life. But everything felt different to me now. I understood that life often places you in situations you cannot control, where others assume they have authority over you simply because of your appearance. And sometimes, surviving those situations is not about confrontation. It's about awareness, composure, and understanding your own worth. As I sipped my coffee, I thought about the officer again. I tried not to feel satisfaction in his discomfort. That wasn't the point. The point was understanding. He had acted based on assumptions, as many do when fear, bias, or habit dictates behavior. But assumptions can only hold power if they are met with fear or submission. That evening, he had met neither. Instead, he encountered dignity, presence, and quiet authority, the kind that doesn't scream or demand, but simply exists. And that, I realized, is a rare form of justice in its purest sense. It doesn't always show up in a court of law or in paperwork. Sometimes, it shows up in the way a person walks away from an encounter intact, unchanged in spirit. I thought about the lessons embedded in the moment, about bias, about the fragility of authority, and about resilience. Every time I had been stopped, scrutinized, or judged unfairly, I had felt a familiar wave of fear. But that fear was never permanent. It was a signal, a reminder to hold oneself steady, to be calm, to remember that no badge, no title, no assumption could define who I am unless I let it. That realization washed over me, and with it, a quiet sense of empowerment. Not loud or dramatic, but steady and enduring. Later in the day, I spoke to my family about what had happened. I didn't dramatize it. I didn't embellish. I told the events plainly, detailing the stop, the tension, the slow realization of the officer, and the presence of my passenger. They listened, eyes wide, some shaking their heads in disbelief. But they understood. They understood the subtle truth that sometimes courage isn't a shout, it's a stillness, a presence, a refusal to allow fear to dictate your response. That was the lesson I wanted them to grasp, the lesson that would ripple beyond this single moment on the side of the road. I also thought about the broader implications. How often do these stops happen? How often are assumptions made that strip people of their dignity before anyone knows their story? I realized the encounter wasn't just about me or my passenger. It was about the countless people who face similar situations without someone calm, composed, or aware beside them. That thought was heavy, but it also reinforced the importance of every small act of awareness, every quiet affirmation of dignity, every refusal to be shaken by bias or fear. Change doesn't always come in headlines or dramatic confrontations. It comes in moments like these, in the subtle assertion of self-worth. By the afternoon, the memory of the stop had shifted from tension to reflection. I could see the lessons clearly now. Presence matters. Awareness matters. And composure, even in the face of authority or bias, is its own kind of power. I didn't feel triumphant. I didn't feel vindictive. I felt steady, grounded, clear. The citation was still there, yes, but it no longer carried the weight of fear. Instead, it was a reminder of what can happen when authority is unchecked, when bias dictates action, and when calm, dignity, and presence meet that authority head-on. That evening, as the sun set again, I walked outside briefly. The air was crisp. The streetlights flickered on one by one. Life went on. Neighbors came and went. Children played in the yards. Ordinary life, unchanged, but for me, entirely transformed. I understood now that each encounter, each moment of bias or unfairness, is also an opportunity, a chance to assert your presence, to navigate authority without fear, and to hold your dignity intact. That understanding wasn't loud. It wasn't dramatic, but it was enduring. And that, I realized, is how change begins, quietly, subtly, and unapologetically. The next few days passed in a strange mixture of normal life and lingering awareness. Every time I thought about that evening, I felt the weight of the stop again, the tension, the flashing lights, the uncertain glances. But I also felt the quiet power that had carried us through it. Driving again on familiar streets felt different. Every stop sign, every traffic light, every passing patrol car reminded me of how close we had come to something that could have escalated. But instead of fear, there was clarity. Presence matters. Composure matters. Calm matters. And those lessons had left a mark that would last far longer than the fear of a single citation. I talked to my passenger about it later, in a quiet voice, after the groceries were put away and the house was settled for the evening. "You handled that perfectly," I said. "I don't think I could have stayed that calm on my own." They smiled, but not smugly, simply with understanding. "You stayed calm too," they replied. "We faced it together. That's what matters." And that truth lingered with me. It wasn't about winning or losing. It wasn't about embarrassment or punishment. It was about surviving with dignity and ensuring that bias and assumptions never stole a moment of your composure. The stop itself began to feel almost surreal. When I thought about the officer now, I didn't feel anger anymore. I felt pity, a quiet understanding that people often act out of habit, assumption, and fear. He had no idea who he was dealing with. He had expected fear, hesitation, submission, and he got none of it. Instead, he faced composure, awareness, and presence. The realization must have been jarring for him, though I would never know for sure. But in my mind, I replayed the moment he looked at the identification, the moment his posture shifted, the subtle tremor in his hands, the brief hesitation in his voice. That had been our quiet victory. Subtle, almost invisible to the world, yet undeniably powerful. In the following days, I thought more about the implications. How many others have faced similar stops and didn't have the calm authority beside them? How many have been judged, humiliated, or even harmed because assumptions outweighed awareness? These questions weighed on me, but they also reinforced the importance of our presence that evening. It reminded me that dignity and composure are not just personal shields, they are acts of quiet defiance, acts that ripple beyond the immediate moment, acts that challenge assumptions and demand recognition. Driving through the same streets again, I noticed things I hadn't before. The way sunlight glinted off the car hoods, the way trees cast long shadows across the pavement, the way neighbors waved to each other without concern. Life went on. The world did not pause for what had happened. And yet, I carried the memory with me as a quiet marker, a reminder that even ordinary life can hold extraordinary lessons. That tension, that fear, that weight, it had been real, but it had not broken me. Not in the slightest. Instead, it had strengthened my awareness, sharpened my composure, and deepened my understanding of how subtle power works. By the end of that week, the citation still sat on the counter at home. But it no longer felt threatening. It had become symbolic, a small paper that once represented control, now a quiet reminder of presence and dignity. Every time I saw it, I remembered the officer's shift, the subtle tremors, the hesitation, and the way calm awareness can dismantle assumptions more effectively than confrontation or anger. And in that reflection, I felt hope, not just for myself, but for everyone who faces moments like this every day. There is power in presence. There is strength in calm. And sometimes, justice doesn't need to be loud to be felt. The days that followed felt quiet, almost ordinary on the surface. But inside, everything had shifted. I went about my usual routine, grocery shopping, errands, cooking, family time. But the memory of that stop stayed with me. Not as fear, not as anger, but as a vivid reminder of what it means to face bias and authority with calm awareness. I realized that authority can be intimidating and assumptions can feel suffocating, but both are fragile when met with dignity. That evening, that moment on the side of the road, had become a personal lesson, one that I knew would carry me for the rest of my life. I thought a lot about the officer, too, not with hatred or desire for revenge, but with understanding. He acted as many do, quick to judge, eager to assert control, blind to context, blind to presence. But when confronted with composure, with calm authority, with quiet awareness, even the most confident assumption can falter. I imagined him thinking back to that evening, replaying the moment he glanced at the identification, the hesitation, the pause, the subtle realization that he had misjudged the situation entirely. I hoped he carried some of that lesson with him, that one encounter, handled properly, can open a person's eyes in a way that no argument or complaint ever could. At home, life felt both normal and transformed. The groceries were unpacked. Dinner was cooked. The day-to-day continued as it always had. But I noticed small things differently. The way sunlight hit the kitchen counter, the way my child laughed while playing in the living room, the way neighbors waved in passing. Every ordinary detail felt layered with meaning now. I realized that moments of tension, fear, and injustice are often intertwined with ordinary life. The true test is how we carry ourselves through those moments. Do we let them define us? Or do we respond with awareness, composure, and presence? That evening had answered that question for me. I also reflected on the broader meaning of the encounter. Racism, bias, and assumptions exist everywhere, in small ways and large. But moments like this show that these systems of bias are not absolute. They can be disrupted, not always loudly, not always dramatically, but through quiet presence, through dignity, through awareness. I understood that justice doesn't always need to arrive in courts or in headlines. Sometimes it arrives in the subtle realization of another human being, that their assumptions were wrong, that their authority is not absolute, that dignity cannot be intimidated. In the quiet of my home that night, I sat by the window again, watching the street lights flicker on and the neighborhood settle for the evening. I felt gratitude, not for the stop, not for the tension, not even for the ticket, but for the lesson it had brought. I felt gratitude for my own composure, for my passengers' calm presence, and for the subtle victory of dignity over assumption. I felt hope that these lessons, however quiet, ripple outward, reaching others who may face similar moments, and reminding them that they have the strength to meet authority and bias with awareness and calm. As I turned off the lights and prepared to rest, I knew that this experience had changed me, not in anger, not in fear, but in understanding. I had witnessed the fragility of assumptions, the limits of authority, and the enduring power of presence. I had felt fear, tension, and uncertainty, but I had also witnessed the quiet dismantling of bias through composure and dignity. And in that, I found a kind of justice that is rare and profound, subtle, invisible to the world, but lasting forever in the way it reshapes perception and restores personal strength. Finally, as sleep began to pull me into the night, I reflected on the truth that now felt permanent. Life will test you in unexpected ways, and people will judge you before they know you. But if you hold your composure, if you meet assumptions with calm awareness, and if you carry yourself with quiet dignity, even the most intimidating moments can be transformed. That evening on the road was not just a stop. It was a reminder, a lesson, a personal victory over bias, fear, and expectation. And in that quiet victory, I found something enduring, the knowledge that I and those beside me are unshakable when we remain grounded, aware, and present.